Hi, everyone. Good morning to you. It is 8 o'clock on the start of your Monday. Glad you're with us for Second Cup. This is one of those days where we have actual news to talk about, and it's somber news as you're waking up to announce the death of Pope Francis at 88 years old. He was a man of the people, for the people, and this morning we want to share your voice, your thoughts, and what you believe the impact will be on the Catholic Church. Because I think that when you consider what's going on here in Western New York and you consider the impact on the Catholic schools and the idea of the Vatican taking a hard look at what happens to some of these schools, to some of these parishes and churches, mergers potentially, you kind of wonder what's next. But before we get to all of that, we have to consider what's next for the Catholic Church itself as we look for a new leader. I do want to bring in two very important people who are here with us this morning. They've been with us all morning. Father Bill Quinlivan from the Buffalo Catholic Diocese and our 7 News senior reporter Eileen Buckley is also here with us. I have to say a very heartfelt thank you to each of you for joining us, because I think we woke both of you up with the news this morning, and I'll kind of lift the curtain about how this all happened. I come in about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it seemed as almost like it was a slower news day, kind of recapping all the joy, the pomp and circumstance around Easter and how Catholics were celebrating, and so much to see, and even marking and noting that the Pope was out and about yesterday in the Pope Mobile, waving and holding Easter Mass, meeting with our Vice President, J.D. Vance. And then about 5 to 4, an alert comes across our desks, and you go, oh my goodness, the Pope is dead. And you instantly think of the Catholics in Western New York, and we could look no further than the two of you to say the impact and really understand as a community what the impact is. So Eileen, we'll start with you. Give us an idea of what you're feeling.
Well, it was surreal when I received the call this morning from our producer, Jonathan. He called me at 4 a.m. To see if I could help out. And of course, it sets into that surreal feeling as you described, seeing him the very day before, giving the blessing on Easter, one of those most important days for Christianity, of the resurrection of Christ. So it was very surreal, very now shocking, and now thinking of what is ahead of us.
And Father Bill, I wonder, give us a sense as a father. We say that the Pope is the father. They call him Papa, right?
Yeah.
What is the thought in the church?
Well, immediately, when you're a father figure, whether a biological father or a father by ordination, you start to think of your children. You start to think of your flock, your sheep. How are they going to respond to this, and how can we shepherd them through this? One stage at a time, one step at a time. And so, as people are awakening, not everybody woke as early as you, Ed, or Eileen, or myself this morning, but as people are awakening to the news, they might need a second cup of coffee to understand the impact of what has happened during the night, and the kind of the grand finale of Pope Francis's papacy as the Holy Father on earth, that he was able to have that last celebration of the Eucharist with the people, and send out a last tweet that Ed read early this morning on the news, that last message of the Holy Father. Very profound and very important for us as we now respond to it, kind of digest the news, and then turn toward what to do next, where we go together as people of faith.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Pope tweeted in his last 2 tweets, 2 very interesting things. And the second one is something that I didn't get to read, but I'll read them both. The Pope tweeted, "Christ is risen. These words capture the entire meaning of our existence, for we are not made for death, but for life." And then he said, "I would like us to renew our hope that peace is possible." And there's so much going on in the world today where you wonder if this is possible, but that was his departing message.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so profound, isn't it, Father, to think that, especially that he passed away right the day after Easter, on Easter Monday, the significance of that and the parallels.
Yes. And you know what? Very often in history, even during times of war, there have been ceasefires during Easter, during Christmas, just to recognize the solemnity of these days. Unfortunately, in the world we're in today, I don't think that's happening anymore. But Francis really kind of carried the flag for peace. I think that's why he took the name Francis as the Holy Father, because of the great Saint Francis of Assisi, and to be an instrument of the Lord's peace, even when there's utter chaos around you, you can still have that peace in your heart, knowing that the Lord is with you, and uniting ourselves to an eternal purpose in this life.
You know, what's interesting here, yesterday we saw Pope Francis's picture on this account. And within the last, oh gosh, I would say half hour or so, that changed. And so if you take a look, now knowing and having the announcement that the Pope has died, we're seeing a completely different version of this account. You know, it's an anecdote, really, but certainly a changing of the guard, I would say, Eileen.
Oh, absolutely, Ed. And I actually wanted to ask Father that to help us understand, both as a Catholic faith and those that aren't following it, what happened, who's actually in charge once something like this happens where you don't have a replacement in place right away? How do things kind of operate? Do you know any of that?
I'm happy to say I'm not in charge of that.
Right.
But there are protocols in place, especially in the recent generation, with the attempt of the life on Pope John Paul II, right there in that same square where they're showing the Holy Father now, Francis, riding in the Pope Mobile. The very reason for the bulletproof. There's always a backup plan to make sure that the administration of the church goes on. And that, so it's not like there's a vice pope who steps in. Interesting, when Francis was elected, Benedict had stepped down. Pope Benedict had stepped down. So there were two living popes, but only one had the authority, because Pope Francis took over as the Holy Father when he was installed. And then Benedict was kind of in retirement, which was something really different in my lifetime. I don't think any of us ever saw a retired pope. But, there's now is that time of watching and waiting, and no major decisions can be made. There's no one to make them, because we don't have a Holy Father to put his seal of approval. The ring that the Holy Father wears has a seal on it for official papal documents. And that ring is actually, during the rituals of the funeral, the ring is actually smashed.
Wow.
It might even be before that, so that no one can pick up that ring and do something with it. Humanity and all our foibles. That's the wisdom of the church going, no, you don't. There's no Holy Father right now. And so it's just that reminder. God is our eternal Father. This life is given to us by him. And there is such a thing as peace. So what we pray for the souls of those who've died is that they will find that profound and eternal peace that the Lord has planned for us, we believe. And for those who don't believe, it's an interesting time for you, I'm sure, to say, what are those crazy Catholics coming up with now? Well, we are people of tradition, and we follow the tradition of our Jewish ancestors, coming to formulate the theology of death and life after death. Mm-hmm. And all we know in this flesh where we're living now is life as we know it. But we see death happen. We see lives come to an end, and it hits the brakes on what our plans were for today. You thought this was Dingus Day. No, today is Pope Francis's death day of passing into eternity. And but still the joy of Easter is there. And so the people who celebrate Dingus Day will be remembering what Pope Francis has given to the church in his years as our Holy Father.
Father, I thought it was really interesting the way you brought up the point this morning, and it kind of like dawned on me and clicked. I'm Jewish. So for me, this is very interesting as an observer of history.
Mhm.
And you drew the parallel between sitting Shiva and, what that means when somebody who's Jewish dies in the Jewish faith. You gather with the family, the immediate family sits on these certain boxes or certain chairs lower to the ground,
Mm.
and everyone comes and gathers and they mourn together, but they certainly celebrate as well. But what you were saying and drawing that parallel this morning is that there are those 9 days of mourning. And I just thought that was so beautifully said. And maybe what you can do is explain that and the symbolism and the similarities.
Yes. So we all need time to comprehend the mystery of death and the profound change that happens. And so sometimes in our modern world of hello internet, and clicking on things and getting an instant answer, our natural process needs, our minds and our hearts need to stop. And really, what makes us as human beings so different from the rest of creation is our ability to reflect, to think through and ponder and just process it. And
Mhm.
it needs time. So the wisdom of the Jewish tradition is to stay in your home, stay close to the place where that person lived. And then in the tradition of the people who have wakes and funerals, in some places they call it a viewing. It's not really so much about I don't call it a viewing. A viewing is just looking at the body, but we're looking beyond that, and we look over the life. People will make photo boards now when they have a wake and look at. I loved when I celebrate funerals for people I never met.
Mhm.
By the time I get to a church, if it's an elderly person who's been infirm for years, I don't always get to meet them. But I love looking at the pictures and seeing them younger, healthier, seeing those moments where they're holding a child and then a grandchild, and all of that cycle and circle of life that goes on. So it's all kind of important. This is really like important time for us. It's sacred time to reflect on all that we've had, and that before we can go forward, we can't hit a fast forward button. On the DVR, you can fast forward 3 times. And with apologies to all the advertisers on Channel 7, when I pre-record TV, I'm always fast forwarding through the
Me
commercials
too, Father.
to
It's okay.
save
Forgive
time.
me.
I can watch a 3-hour award ceremony in 35 minutes and save a whole lot of time. So,
It's true, right?
um,
I understand.
yes.
Not in this case, though. Things are going to
No,
move
no, no.
smoothly
No.
and slowly.
Can't fast forward. We
Uh,
have to go. The other thing I want to share with you, a thought I was having as we were preparing for this today, in the last hour. One of the things that Pope Francis brought to the church that most of us had never heard of before, in South America, there's a tradition of a devotion to the Virgin Mary, and they call her the undoer of knots. And so there's that tradition that because she's the mother of the church, she can turn to her son, who is Jesus, and ask him to help us untie what gets knotted up in us. And sometimes when you hear the news of someone dying, you say, I get a knot in my stomach. It's almost like, our digestive process physically is affected by what we're processing up here and in our heart. And so the undoer of the knots is a merciful look at the time that it takes. It's like the mother who helps the child when they fall and skin their knee. The mother, they said, you want me to kiss it and make it better? Well, talk to medical people. They're like, that's not going to make it better. But the child's there's that intimacy of the mother caring for her child's wounds. And so our church is our mother and cares for the wounds of our people. Pope Francis was a very compassionate, I think hopefully all the popes have been compassionate to people in need, but he had particular care for the poor, particular interest in the social justice teachings of the church. And I wish I could tell you I read everything that he wrote, but as a pastor now of 4 parishes and 5 churches, not exactly time for that. But I like to try to pick up the highlights and the cliff notes of the writings of the popes, because we now have that as a legacy, though, of the things that he contributed to the application of our teaching and in the gospel to this life, this world, this moment in time which is the only moment we have right now, you know.
Sure.
Time does come to an end when we pass away. So as we honor the life and the church legacy of Pope Francis, we now just gather together, even on the internet, you know, virtually people are gathering. I'm sure people are calling each other and saying, "Did you hear?
Right.
But I thought I just saw in the news that he had mass yesterday." Yes, it's profound, it's amazing, and what a gift for him to be able to have that one last time to bless the people as the Holy Father. We may not have known he was on his way out, but it's good for us to always be ready.
You know, to that point, and you talk about the church being the father or the mother. We just got a statement from the bishop here in the Buffalo Catholic Diocese on the death of Pope Francis, and I want to read that to you. The diocese says, "With heavy hearts and profound gratitude, we commend to our loving and one true God the soul of Pope Francis, the good and faithful servant of servants, who guided our universal church and the Catholic faithful these past 12 years. Pope Francis's example of humility and simplicity, his constant call to seek peace, and his openness to all will forever remind us of our Lord Jesus Christ himself, whom he mirrored in spirit and throughout his long and devoted life as a faithful layman, priest, bishop, and pontiff." They go on to say, "We also humbly appeal to the Holy Spirit now to guide the cardinals of our church as they prepare to select the successor to Pope Francis. May their only motive be to choose one among them who is possessed with great holiness, compassion, wisdom, and courage, and best suited to now lead our church forward in this complex and difficult age." So, Eileen, you know, when you consider that statement and the idea that there is going to be one person who is chosen in this conclave, walk us through the process here.
Well, I'm no expert on it, but just from what I've read and what I've learned in the past from when, you know, Pope John Paul had passed away, is you have the papal conclave, which will elect a new pope. And some of these cardinals that I've looked through have actually been named by Pope Francis himself. So that leads the way to the selection process of who they would, vote for next. And what I learned over time is, it is a secretive voting process when they conduct that. But it will lead, obviously, to the selection of the next pope. What type of style that person will bring all depends on, obviously, who they select and what type of personality they will bring to our Catholic Church. So that is part of the process. And I did want to go back a little bit to what you both were talking about a little bit earlier about the 9-day of mourning process within this at the Vatican. Now, the cardinals, from what I understand, will decide the funeral for Pope Francis, and then his body will be on display at St. Peter's Basilica, and they will hold a mass each day leading up to his funeral, from what I understand. Father, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. And I can recall the mourners, how they lined up during that time of Pope John Paul II's death. Mm-hmm. It was very powerful.
And Eileen, when you talk about the Catholic faithful, as a Catholic, set the stage for us. What goes through your mind as you look ahead to the future?
Well, in such a difficult political climate where so many people are divided on so many issues and topics that we just can't seem to find that middle ground too. I think that goes back to what Father had talked about earlier in the broadcast today, was about kind of being in the middle and being able to evenly balance all these difficult issues. I think Pope Francis really started that. Whether that'll move forward or not, or whether we'll go backwards with someone else who may be more conservative than he was, only that will tell of what who the cardinals decide on. But I think it will be a huge concern for Catholics of the leadership and which direction that next pope will take us. Don't you think so, Father?
I do. I do. And, I think Pope Francis will be remembered as a reformer. He didn't call a Vatican council,
Hmm.
but from day one, he always had a concern for the poor, for the marginalized. And as I'm recalling, I think he even had them build like shelters and showers in St. Peter's area for the homeless people in Rome. And that care, the shelter for the homeless and the feeding of the poor. And, sometimes as the church, we're so careful in protecting our sacred space, which is important. I think I saw an event on the internet the other day that there were some protesters who got up on an altar at the Vatican and smashed some candles. So there's the reality that we need security because there's a lot of violence in the world, and that's why the Pope, of course, and everybody else calls for peace. We need to be peaceful people, and even when we disagree respectfully. But I think his love for the poor is what I think I'll remember about him a lot. He wasn't the type of person he had certainly a lofty position. You don't get a higher position on earth in the Catholic Church than the Pope, the Holy Father. But he didn't like, as the expression is, kiss up to the people of influence. He reached out to the people with no influence other than that they're children of God and they have dignity in their human life and they're precious in God's sight. And that, I think, more than any papal document, I think that's the thing that one of the things Francis will be remembered for. And it's not that, the expectation of an ex-pope is, well, you better do what Francis did. No, we all can learn from what Pope Francis did. And in our local community, in our neighborhood, on our street, reach out to the people who are the most broken, disenfranchised, disconnected. I was just saying yesterday on Easter Sunday, it feels like 5 years after COVID, all kinds of people came back to church this year. I'm like, at last, people are coming back. And, as a pastor, you like to think, oh, I must be doing a good job. So they can, no. They're coming back because they feel the need to go and worship. And they feel it's a safer environment as far as disease that they might catch, thanks be to God, 5 years later. Yet, on the other hand, there's that need. Everybody needs to connect with the next life and the eternal. There's a deep, deep desire in the human heart that we can't even put into language. And now when you think about the Holy Father passing away rather suddenly, but after a long illness, and the early morning after Easter, you just think, wow, all of the longings of his soul now can find their fulfillment. And the expression used often is, well done, good and faithful servant. I think Bishop Mike Fisher's statement actually said that, good and faithful servant.
Yeah.
He really was a servant, and can't imagine the workload of a pope. You have people, as they say, who work for you, who you can ask to follow through. On the other hand, a lot of it comes back to you. You are the face of the Catholic Church throughout the world, and the many different faces of many different nations and people. And I think even non-believers, even people of other faiths who are not in communion with us, there's something about the Holy Father that kind of calls for a respect, even if you disagree with our teachings. You go, look at this guy. There's something about him, and that I think that's what the grace of the Holy Spirit does for whichever pope gets elected. So
I gotta say, it's kind of almost like the role of the president. Politics aside, you respect the position. You may not necessarily like the guy, but it's still the president of the United States.
Right.
And you mentioned also that he is the face, and the buck stops with him. And Eileen, we have in Buffalo been dealing with a major crisis within the diocese when it comes to the road to renewal, the bankruptcies, the sex scandals. He had a zero tolerance for that. And, we should also mention that he was basically on the precipice of either saving or agreeing that some churches should be merged or closed altogether or keeping them open. So where do we go from here?
Well, that's remains to be seen, but there is, the whole process there. I mean, there's the Vatican members that are in Washington, D.C., also that help make decisions here for the U.S. too. And Father, maybe you can help out a little bit on that from my knowledge. But yes, those many letters from those churches that are scheduled to close or merge by this June, many of those churches, the parishes, the parishioners have come together and written to the Vatican for their appeal. They sent off this big process, and many are now getting letters back that have said, we are putting your church closing or merger on hold for now due to the fact that we will review this and take the process to review it. How long that will take, it could give them some months ahead to stay open and before that decision is made as to whether they think the diocese broke a canon law.
Right.
So interesting here what Christina is saying. We finally had a pope who was more concerned about modeling the teachings of Jesus than quibbling about canon law. The loss of this beacon of love in the world will be deeply felt. I just want to point out to our viewers who are watching here on Second Cup that we're going to have to pause in just a second for Aaron to do the weather. But Father, maybe, you quibble about canon law, but it's part of the faith.
Right. Well, it's part of the administration of the organization that is worldwide. And, without laws, there's chaos. But law is not God. God is God. And so underneath the authority of the Lord, there's the responsibility of trying to be careful in your decisions. And the primary concern is the destiny of souls in eternity. And what we're going through now is very difficult. I'm a pastor who just closed a church in November. I'm a pastor who has 2 churches that are on a watch list this year. We don't know what's going to happen at the end of the year. On the other hand, the concern is for the people, and will the people find another beautiful building to worship the Lord in is really the higher goal in all of this. You will always have people who will say, oh, I wouldn't want my church to ever close. Nobody wants their church to close. Nobody wants their parents to divorce, but those things happen, and it touches the heart, but the mind and the heart have to work together. So the mind of Christ is foremost in the church. How do the souls find their way to heaven? I love my churches. I love the church I grew up in very much, have great, great memories of profound spiritual things there. But I'm not meant to be in that building forever. I'm meant to be in heaven with the Lord. Please, God, someday. So on the way there, we just carried the cross for 40 days in Lent, and we're not done carrying the cross in the Diocese of Buffalo. We still have some difficulty. We have a lot of people who have suffered in the past from abuse, and it's a horrible sin. Every sin is a scandal, but that one's especially painful. However, the Lord is with us. The Lord is a God of mercy and forgiveness. And the clergy need forgiveness as much as the lay people. And the Pope needed forgiveness too. Can you imagine being the confessor to the Holy Father? That would be an interesting role. Every Holy Father has probably a crew of them. I always say that I used to have a couple of them on speed dial myself to call my confessors when I needed them. But difficult times for sure. But that's all we're in the journey. And the journey is about being together with each other. There will be disagreements. There will be divisions, of course. Ever since the Garden of Eden, there's been disagreement. There's been sin, but there's also amazing grace. And it's kind of fascinating to watch how the Lord's going to see us through not only the change of role for a Holy Father, but whatever's coming in the next months and years for the Diocese of Buffalo.
It'll certainly be interesting to watch. Eileen, I want to give you a final thought here as we wrap up on Second Cup on this somber Monday.
Well, Ed, I think it's going to be an interesting week ahead for us Catholics here in Western New York to watch how everyone comes forward and mourns and remembers such a great Pope and how he's touched many lives, even beyond Catholic communities. So it will be quite interesting to see all that. And maybe, hopefully, this could bring some strength to our Catholic Church and maybe, bring some people back and draw some attention to the good that the Pope has done in the Catholic community and beyond.
A very interesting conversation. Thank you both for your perspective. Father Bill, Eileen, really appreciate you joining us bright and early this morning throughout the broadcast and here on Second Cup. And thank you so much for joining us. We do send our condolences to the Catholic community, and we'll be covering this for you throughout the day. Have a great day, everyone.
God bless you.